What's up, guys? Doge Poke here, back with another episode of Poker Hands. What's up, guys? I mentioned in the last vlog that I was going to do a video talking about hands that I couldn't include in the last vlog I made because I wasn't able to film them. So this video is just going to be those hands. Some of these hands are ones that I thought I played well, and then other ones are just interesting for whatever other reason. And then some of them I thought I played badly, and I do want to analyze and correct them. So without further ado, let's get into the first hand, which is the biggest hand I played the entire trip and definitely made a huge difference in the results. There's one limp somewhere, folds to me on the button. I make it $25. The player in the small blind flats. The player in the big blind 3-bets to 140 here, which is quite big if you ask me. Limper folds, and I decide I'm going to 4-bet here, and I make it 600 when we're about 1200 effective. Also quite big, but it doesn't really matter for this hand. I could have made it a bit smaller, maybe 420 or something like that. I don't know. Small blind gets out of the way. And then the player in the big blind grabs his stack of white chips and he slams them down on the table so hard that one of the $100 chips flies across. We're not sitting across from each other lengthwise, but we're across like this. One of the $100 chips goes across the table, falls next to me, and I'm about to pick it up. And then the dealer's just like, no, I got it. And I'm like, okay, I call. I have aces. So we're running it.
No, this aces is okay. It's good.
It started with 12, so let's see.
Press the board dealer. Good. 3. Set.
Jesus Christ. The flop comes down, queen high. Turn comes a king. River comes a 5. And my opponent says set and shows pocket 7s. He jams for more than 200 bigs effective with pocket 7s and gets there. And yeah, that was the biggest pot of the entire trip. And if I had won this hand, just this hand alone, I would have been up, I think, 2,700 or so on the trip instead of 300 something. But unfortunately, we lose this hand to this guy. And he also slow rolls, as you see in the video. He didn't show to the river. So very unfortunate, but it is what it is. All right, guys. So this hand is a pretty interesting one. To give you guys some context, this player was a young reg. I could pretty clearly tell that he was a good player. And very early on in the session, we were involved in a hand where I had probably just 2 high cards. I was the pre-flop raiser and the flop came down, let's just say queen high or jack high or something like that. I c-bet, he calls, turn comes out another card, didn't really matter. I bet again, and then he raised me. And it didn't really make any sense. I didn't have a pair or anything here, but I just folded anyways because I'm facing a raise and it just didn't make sense to call. And then he showed me the 3 of spades. And again, I don't know what the exact cards were, but just based on the board, him having the 3 of spades made it so that whatever he was bluffing with didn't really make sense. He either had ace 3 of spades, which wouldn't have made much sense given the board, or he just had a hand he shouldn't be playing. I don't know, 5 3 of spades, 4 3 of spades, or just a random hand. So given that information and just given the fact that he wanted to show for whatever reason, I kind of had the idea that he just wanted to kind of prove himself and show that he knew I was going to be betting a high percentage of the time and he wanted to play back at me. So with that information, we get into this hand where I have pocket 7s in the hijack. Action folds to me. I make it $20 and the same player I mentioned before, he's in the small blind and he calls. Big blind folds. We're going to a flop heads up, which comes down 6 jack 5 rainbow. Not a terrible flop for my hand, and also a flop that I'm going to be c-betting a lot of the time. So when my opponent checks to me, I put out a small bet of 15, and he check raises to $80 here. And I'm thinking to myself, it just really wouldn't make much sense for him to raise on a board like this for value. 5s and 6s, I don't think he's flatting those in the blinds against an open, especially when he probably can tell too that I'm a thinking player trying to play well. So set mining here doesn't really benefit him that much, and we're not playing super deep. If he had jacks, he would have 3-bet, and I don't think raising with ace jack or something here makes sense. So even though I just have pocket 7s, I call here, not really believing him, and also considering what he had done in that previous hand I talked about. We're going to a turn card, and it comes down another 6, putting a second diamond on the board. My opponent now, that's 120. And once again, I don't believe him. The issue here is that I'm often going to face a bet on the river in spots like these, even when I think that my opponent's bluffing, and I basically just have a bluff catcher. So do I really want to call down with pocket 7s? Usually no, but this guy has shown that he's like trying to play back at me. I think very often he just knows that I'm a thinking player, and if I call on the turn, I think a high percentage of the time he's just going to check river and give up. And I remember specifically thinking that for this hand. So ultimately, I decide to call. We're going to a river, and it comes down the deuce of hearts, as blank as it gets, and as expected, he checks to me now, and I have a pretty easy check back, expecting him to just have nothing here. I check back, and he ends up showing 10-8 of spades. So we were right, he did have nothing. 10-8 of spades kind of sort of makes sense as a bluff. A 9 would make him open-ended, a 7 would make him open-ended, a spade would help him as well. But again, it's just really hard to balance bluffs on this board because, like I said, he shouldn't really have 6s or 5s. 2-pair combos don't really make sense. Jack's 3-bet, and besides that, I don't think he has like 6-5 suited ever. He shouldn't really be playing anything from the small blind here, or flatting anything from the small blind, I should say, that plays like this for value. I think the lesson here is just you don't have to play back against other players who are also like trying to win at the game. We could just exist and do our thing against all the other players. But he did want to show me the 3 of spades in that last hand, and that gave me enough information to call down. Speaking of not playing back against other good players, in this hand, I have king queen offsuit. We're 6-handed and also at the same table as George. I'm also to his right, so out of position against him, which we of course love. I open to 25 in the low jack / under the gun, and I get 3 callers, including George. We're going to a flop 4 ways, and it comes down 5, 6, 10 rainbow. We've got 2 overs here, but not much besides that. And given how multi-way the pot is, once the 2 blinds check to me, I decide to just play straightforward here, especially because George is also in the hand, and I check. George now decides to bet $35, and the small blind and the big blind call. And me being the type who likes to like squeeze and go after like dead money in the pot, even though this wouldn't really be a squeeze, it's kind of different. I see an opportunity to try and steal here, which I disagree with in hindsight, which we'll get to. And I decide to make it 220 here. And I'm pretty sure I remember specifically thinking that George is going to see that this doesn't make sense. And if he's betting into 3 players here, I think he just has at least a 10 here. So honestly, this is just a bad play in general. And George is good enough to be willing to just call down here, even if he just has like some kind of weak-ish top pair, because he knows that this doesn't make sense for me. And if I had a value hand, I would definitely have bet it first. But fortunately for me, the one player who I was worried about calling, which is George, folds, and I'm pretty sure the other 2 players are going to fold as well. The small blind folds. The player in the big blind was this kind of funny drunk guy who we had played with before. He thinks for a while and eventually lets it go as well. So we take down a decent medium-sized pot here. But looking back at this hand, I don't really need to look for a spot to steal here. The other 2 players, I expected that they aren't really going to see this situation for what it is, but George definitely is. And he even mentioned to me after the session was over and we were talking about hands in the car, he was saying like, you know, I basically donated to you, right? Because I know you're just like, you're never like check raising with a strong hand here. It just doesn't make sense. He just folded because there's no point in getting it in for like $1,000 against me when we're both just trying to have a good trip and both win. It would just be stupid for us to get into a hand 200 big blinds deep against each other. But yeah, he definitely could have just called down or jammed or something like that and just won. But yeah, this was a hand where I definitely shouldn't have done what I did, but it was a funny one, and we end up winning a medium-sized pot. Nice. This hand is my favorite one from the trip, and it is one of the most absurd lines I've ever taken. We're 6-handed. I'm in the hijack with ace-5 suited. Once action folds to me, I make it $20. The player in the cutoff calls, and the big blind call. So we're going 3 ways to a flop, and it comes down jack 5 jack 2 diamonds. Now, the player in the cutoff, he had to show down bluffs multiple times on the river throughout this session, and he always had a hand that just didn't really make sense to bluff with, and also just shouldn't have been played to begin with. So he definitely was a recreational player. And another thing about him was that he would always min raise. He always raised to exactly 2 times the previous bet, and he didn't really know how to size his bets. So me and George both thought he was probably a limit player. We called him Beard Guy because he just had a very distinct beard. Anyways, the player in the big blind checks. I put out a small C bet of $20 here. Beard Guy decides to basically min raise to $45 here, doing so pretty quickly as well. Big blind folds, and in this moment, I just knew he was just so full of shit. He definitely doesn't play a jack like this, and just given that he is willing to bluff all the other times, it was just pretty clear that he had nothing. So I make the call with my 5 here. Turn brings another jack. So now I have a boat, and I'm certain he doesn't have a jack here. In the moment, I remember thinking to myself that given how I had played, I could definitely have all the overpairs here, and he just can't because he didn't 3-bet. So I could have aces, kings, I could have quads, I could have boats, I could have the exact hand I'm having now. I remember thinking to myself that if I had those hands, how would I play it, or how would I represent those kind of hands to this specific player who I think wasn't exactly aware of what was going on in a lot of situations. And I let out for $75 into a pot of about 150, which I just don't have a leading range because why would I? Why would I overcomplicate my game? But in this specific spot against this specific player who was very recreational, it was just a thing where I just absolutely knew he had nothing, and I was just playing to like rep a range that I think that would have a lot of strong hands that I could have that he could never have. Obviously, the like simple answer to a situation like this where my opponent just has nothing is to just check call down. I remember George was talking to me about this after this hand, and he was like, I saw you lead, and I was like, what the hell are you doing? Also, part of me just wanted to take down the pot even though I like knew I was ahead. Weird thing, but whatever. My opponent doesn't fold. He min raises again, making it 150. And I just know he has nothing here. So I call again. The river comes at 10. And the only like kinda sorta hands, like kinda sorta hands that he could have had here for value would be something like 9s or 10s that didn't want to 3-bet for whatever reason. Like maybe because there are players who will they'll raise with pocket pairs or like call with pocket pairs like 8s, 9s, 10s, and they will play it very aggressively on the flop sometimes because they're afraid of getting outdrawn. So let's say someone has 10s and the flop's like 7, 5 deuce, and then someone bets. A lot of players will just raise really big or even bet really big because they just want to take down the pot without having to see an overcard. They don't want to be in a tough situation. This could kind of sort of be the same thing where like on Jack 5 Jack, he might think that I'm full of shit and he has like 9s or 10s, and he like might have like raised with those, but given that he had bluffed earlier and had to show bluffs that didn't make sense, it was just very clear to me that he had nothing, and I believed he had absolutely nothing. So what did I do? I decided to lead out again, this time for 350, for the same kind of rationale that I had on the turn, which is like to rep a strong hand that I could have that he can't have, aces, kings, whatever. I thought this was just a sizing that would make it look like I had that, even though I thought I was ahead. I decided that I wanted to bet and try to get him to fold. It made no sense. He thinks for a while, and I think he like looks at his cards, definitely just trying to save face, and then he lets it go. I take down the hand. I move my cards over to the right where George is sitting, and I hold them up for him to see. My opponent is like, show one, show all. I'm very happy to show. So I go, you want to see it? I turn over the ace. You got it. I turn over the 5, and no one at the table said anything, but I know they're all looking at this hand, seeing what just happened, and they're like, what in the world was this line? It was the weirdest line I've ever taken, probably in any like recent hand. It was just so absurd. Calling a min raise on the flop, and then leading turn, calling a raise again, and then just leading big on the river. It made no sense. Somehow I got more value by like leading out and just allowing him to raise me than I probably would have otherwise. I just thought it was hilarious because we talked about this hand afterwards, and George was like, what in the world were you doing on the turn? Another thing we thought of, this was actually suggested by George. He was like, if you think he has nothing, you could just check call river, which I definitely could have done. But either way, this was a very just weird, unorthodox line that I thought would be very fun to include for the vlog. So think of this hand as you will, and yeah, I will probably remember this hand for a very long time because it was just so strange. Onto a hand that I think I did not play well. This was actually one of the most memorable bad hands I played. I have queen 10 of diamonds on the button here. The player in under the gun +1, who seemed like a fairly like standard player, probably like reg, maybe like a casual reg, makes it $20. Action folds to me, and I decide to flat on the button. Queen 10 suited might be a little weird as a call, just because I think it's going to be dominated a lot. Maybe I could 3-bet, even though I'm on the button. Not sure, to be honest, guys. The small blind and the big blind call as well, so we're going 4 ways to a flop of ace jack 10 with 2 clubs. We have a pair and a gut shot to Broadway here. Action checks to the initial raiser, and he makes it $35. Me being a fairly like aggressive player who likes to just play draws aggressively, I decide to raise to 120 here. Now looking back, I don't like this raise at all because this just isn't the spot to be raising with like this kind of draw. If the board was like 9-8-6 or something, I think that would make a lot more sense because my opponent's strong hands are going to be things like maybe over pairs, maybe top pair, something like that. But in a situation like this, even if I do hit like 2 pair, am I really loving it when there's 4 to a straight? Even if I hit trips, my opponent could definitely have the nuts or a lot of equity against me. And also my opponent could just absolutely have like king, queen, ace, jack, jack 10, whatever here. So I don't like my line here. It's just a little too weak. Just a little too weak, guys. Anyways, the small blind folds, the big blind folds as well, and my opponent calls. Unfortunate. We're going to a turn card, and it comes down the 6 of spades. Complete blank. This hand is so bad. Oh my god. My opponent checks to me. I decide to continue the aggression, and I bet 225 here, and I get jammed on and have to fold. There really just isn't much to say in this hand. My opponent could definitely have all of the strongest hands, and I just chose a bad spot to bluff because I wanted to. This is something I talk about with my poker buddies a lot. I definitely have the potential to be like a solid, good player, and then I just have these moments where I decide to just be aggressive or like take weird lines for no reason. I definitely would just have a better hourly and just be a better player overall if I just valued the consistent decisions, which would just be to fold flop and not put myself in a weird spot. But then I decided to raise, and then I wanted to commit to the bluff on the turn, and then I just get jammed on because of course my opponent could just have anything super strong here. So yeah, just a bad hand. And yeah, not proud of this one, but we're just gonna lose, and we're just gonna learn a good lesson, which is stop overcomplicating things. In this next hand, we are 4-handed. I have pocket jacks, and we're once again playing with the psycho player who jammed on me with 7s before. There is a mandatory straddle. The player on the button calls, and I decide to raise to $40 here. The big blind flats, and the other 2 players call. So we're going 4-handed, family pot, to a flop of 5-8 deuce rainbow. Perfect flop for pocket jacks here. I put out a bet of $65 here, and the crazy player and the player on the button call. The turn brings the 3 of clubs, so still a pretty safe card. I now put out another bet of $100 for value, and I saw that the crazy player was sitting on a stack of around 300 or so. So this was kind of to not only get value from both players, but to also induce him to jam, which I think he does a lot of the time. And he does indeed jam for a total of $295. And interestingly, the player on the button now flats the $295. Not sure what he has, but definitely cannot fold, so I make the call. The river comes the 10 of clubs, completing the backdoor flush. I am now not feeling super confident. I'm kind of wondering what the other player has. He could have 10-8. He could have something with the back, maybe like ace-8 of clubs, something like that. I check, and the player on the button shows that he has 8-6 of clubs. I didn't realize that he had a flush at the time because I was not expecting him to check. The crazy player, he starts getting very angry, and not angry at me, but he looks at me, he's like, he sees the other player had a flush, which I didn't see at the time. And he was like, why didn't you re-raise the turn? Like he was telling me. I'm like waiting for him to show, right? Because he was all in. I was like, you were on first. And then I specifically said to him, I was like, you've slow rolled me before. Like I'm waiting for you to show. He gets more angry. He's just like, I have nothing. I have nothing. So I'm like, okay, I have jacks. The dealer points at the 8-6 and says that the button had a flush. And then I'm like I'm mad now. I'm like, damn it, because I didn't see the flush. So we lose a big hand to this guy. The crazy player later said that he had pocket deuces when he had like calmed down. He didn't speak perfect English, but he basically said to me like, I had deuce, why didn't you re-raise the turn? Like you would get him to fold, right? And then the kid on the button was just like, no, I wasn't going to fold. He had pair plus flush draw. So yeah, we lose to 8-6 suited here, unfortunately. On a run out that's very, very clean for jacks, and I thought I'd win a pretty big pot against the, the kind of crazy player plus this kid. But unfortunately, we lose this one. I thought it was a fun hand. Honestly, not much to say. I think the turn was the the crux of the hand. I think betting 100 there, hoping that this player would jam, was a good move. I mean, let's look back at it. What else could I have done? Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. Betting 100 to get value from both players here, I think that was the move. And the hand basically played itself after that. So yeah, just unfortunate, but I thought it was a funny one. And it does, highlight more about this guy right here. Fun player, by the way. Not a dick, even though he did slow roll me in that other hand. He was kind of like a player who's just happy to be there, if that makes sense. We saw him pretty much every day, and he was just very loose, very aggressive, just having a good time. Definitely would want him at my table pretty much anytime. All right, guys, for this last hand, it's not super crazy or anything, but there was a player at the table who he looked like Oscar Isaac if Oscar Isaac wasn't handsome and wasn't an actor. He was kind of like an off-brand version of him. And he had sat down at some point during this session with like a massive wall of chips. He probably had like 1.2k to 1500. I don't really remember, to be honest. And he was one of those players who would stack his chips in a very weird way. He had like double stacks and he had them all in a line. Also, he was one of those players who's super obnoxious, kind of trash talking people and just like playing super aggressively. You do see those players every now and then, but they're kind of those players you kind of imagine at a poker table, and then when you actually see them, you're like, wow, people like this actually exist. He was open raising to like 150 or something, and just like taking down small pots because no one's like calling him, and people didn't really know how to play against that. I had gone to the restroom or to get food or something for a few minutes. I came back and he had $300 in front of him. Yeah, he somehow dusted it all off in that small period of time. And given the way he was playing, just open raising to like 150 or so, I had a very clear game plan against him, which is just to get it in with any decent hand pre-flop. So I pick up ace king of clubs. I'm out of position against him, unfortunately. The player under the gun folds, and instead of opening here, I decide to just limp because if you open raise, he might fold. So I limp to induce. He does what I expect and raises to 150. Action folds back to me. I put him all in. He calls. Run out comes, double paired board, sevens and deuces, and another card. I forget the exact run out. It didn't matter. He does this to me to show first since I had shoved. I'm pretty confident here with ace king. I've got two pair with the ace kicker, hoping to at least be chopping. I show my hand and he shows queen 7 offsuit for a boat. And that was the only hand I got in against this player. He later moved tables and had gotten kicked out because he apparently called another player an idiot. I heard the other player screaming at him. So yeah, that happened. And unfortunately, even though we get the money in good and play this hand pretty much perfectly against this exact player type, we're just going to lose. So I think out of all of the ones that I lost that were just like big all-ins or something like that, I played them fine, but just unfortunate. The queen 10 hand was the bad one. And then, of course, there was the ace 5 crazy shenanigans. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed those hands. These were just ones I thought were interesting and wanted to share, but unfortunately couldn't really get footage of. And I know that HBC doesn't really allow vlogging, so I won't be able to get footage from there, but I will try to play more at Gardens. And of course, I will try to plan some Vegas trips in the future to get some hands. So hope you guys enjoyed these ones, and I will see you in the next video, which will be an actual vlog that you guys know and love. Subscribe, like, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.